Welcome everyone. और हम अंग्रेजी और उर्दू और पंजाबी में मिक्स बात करेंगे. I'm very honored and privileged that Dr. Pippa Virdee is here in Lahore, and I've been asked to interview her about her new book, which is called Pakistan, a very short introduction. Dr. Pippa is a professor in modern South Asian history at DeMontfort University in the UK. She's the author of From the Ashes of 1947, Reimagining Punjab, which was published in 2017, and Coming to Coventry, Stories from the South Asian Pioneers, published in 2006. And she has done many other papers and edited volumes, but this particular book is her exclusive book on Pakistan, and it's a really wonderful book. It's a shame that it's not widely available in Pakistan, and it should be, and we'll also talk about that. But this book gives a very important perspective on Pakistan, which often is ignored by many writers and historians and analysts when they cover Pakistan, especially from the outside. We have seen titles like Pakistan exploding and imploding and sinking and collapsing. On the other hand, this book looks at the peoples, who are the people of Pakistan, what comprises Pakistan's geography, its cultures, its diversity, and not just today, but for thousands of years. So in a way, it sort of presents and brings together a very different framework to know Pakistan, understand Pakistan, and introduce Pakistan to those who may not know as much. And even to Pakistanis, given the way we have doctored our histories, we have created and constructed a particular brand of nationalism in Pakistan. So Dr. Pippa's work is actually groundbreaking in that sense. And welcome, Pippa, to Lahore and to Afkar-e Taza. So before we begin asking you about the contents and the different themes that are covered in your book, I'd like to know what motivated you to write this book. I mean, it's a short introduction, I mean, rightly titled, but obviously they, with this focus on Pakistan, so tell us.
I'm going to apologize in advance because I have a bit of a cough that's persisting. So if I cough, please, I apologize. What motivated me? It's a really difficult question because I was approached by OUP, Oxford University Press, 2017 now. It was some time ago. So they approached me and asked me if I would consider writing this book. For those who are not familiar, this very short introduction, VSI, is a format. They've published hundreds of different titles dealing with concepts, places, people. So it's within a particular series of and a style of book, which gives people an introduction to that place or concept. So when I got this email in 2017, I was like, oh, this is initially very exciting. But then I think I took a step back and I thought, okay. So my people who know me know that I specialize in the history of Punjab, and I'm a Punjabi myself. So that, in a way, is my kind of ground and my territory in many ways. And I was fine with that. But this is now taking it to a national framework. So there was this, I think, hesitance on my part that how can I approach this history of Pakistan? Because in many ways I'm an outsider, but I'm also an insider to the extent that I belong to this region, I was born in this region, so I understand this place quite well, or at least I think I understand this place. So there was this, quite a difficult sort of conversation going on in myself, that how would I approach this? And then फिर मैं सोचा कि चलो ठीक है, let's have a look at this, let's do a bit of research. And I started looking at what are the other titles, how have they approached Pakistan's history. And I think ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚਾਰ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਖਾਸ. So when the Pakistanis write about Pakistan, it's through that nationalist framework. When the British or when you have outside Western nations, they write about Pakistan very much with this security concern. And when the Indians write about Pakistan, it's about the other. And then the others are, well, what is Pakistan? Where is Pakistan, right? So it doesn't matter. And so within these kind of four approaches, there was this question of, okay, what can I bring to this history or this understanding and my interpretation? So I was very conscious that kuch different hona chahiye, because I think I bring a unique perspective. There's very few writers who have access to both India and Pakistan, who travel between the two places, but are located in the West. So I think the hesitancy also was partly because when the log history likhde a, it's or jadon anthropology da kam jo bhi research ho reha ya log bada eh sochde hai ki acha eh ta baron aayi hai enu ki pata hai ithe bare, right? Ki you have to belong to that place in order to have a voice and to be able to articulate those places. Ki jehde andar de log a ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਮਿਲਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ. So I think there was also a bit of that in my reasoning ki सोच समझ के क्या करना. But then I was encouraged, and then I thought chalo theek hai, let's do it. It's a challenge, but let's do this.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's what I wanted to also highlight about the insider-outsider, dichotomy and always the dilemma, what you mentioned, because when people write about Pakistan from abroad, they, the first critique is, oh, well, what do they know about the country? How much do they know? Do they know the language, or they just fly-by-night journalists or historians or writers or whatever. But anyway, Pippa, going back to your book, I mean, and the title, so... and you highlighted how the two frames, particularly the hyper-nationalist understanding of Pakistan that is promoted and documented here, and of course the other, or the truncated, the artificial state, etc., thesis. But you choose to pick up the history in a way of who these people are and what this land is all about. So tell us, I mean, how do you see that fitting into Pakistan's identity, because that's an underlying theme in your book, the tension, the search of Pakistan and Pakistanis to find their identity. Do they belong to the Indus Valley civilization? What about the Indian civilization, quote unquote? What about the non-Muslim heritage that Pakistan has? Or is it a purely Islamic project? So how do you resolve those different tensions, as much as those identities are still an open question in the Pakistani imagination?
Yeah. No, so when I was starting to write the book, I was doing a lot of general reading. And one of the things that I came across was R.E.M. Wheeler's 5,000 Years of Pakistan History, which was written in 1950. And I was like, 5,000 saal, right? For a nation just barely born, he's writing about the 5,000-year history of Pakistan. He was the Director General of Archaeology in India, and then he got a new role in Pakistan. And so he was beginning to look at the material, cultural history of Pakistan. And I think it was from that कि मैं क्यों लिया, because I thought कि this is a really interesting way to understand the long history. So although it's a short introduction, actually the book covers a very big canvas, in the sense that I'm going back to 5,000-6,000 years ago. And I thought कि actually one way in which you can try to understand this tension is to separate this idea of Pakistan as a political project and separate that from the people and the land. Because the people and the land have always been there. But the political project, the kind of nationalist project that emerged, is a very new idea. So if you can try to separate these two different things, then you can try to unpack some of these layers. And I think that was my approach. A political project has been done in detail, right? So my purpose wasn't so much to spend time understanding that, but to understand the people and the territory. I mean, in many ways, there's waves and waves of migration over the periods that have gone on to make what is Pakistan today. And you only need to look around, right? You can visibly see the differences and the languages and the ethnicities. So that is a given. So although politically and nationally you're all the same, but underneath that there are differences. And I wanted to try to kind of understand those histories of those kind of differences. So Odevaste, then actually this R.E.M. Wheeler's work is quite good, because he's tracing the history back to the Indus Valley, which territorially sits in this land, right? So then you can start to kind of look at this. But the problem, of course, with looking at the ancient civilization is that as a country, if you want to own that diversity, then you embrace that past and that diverse past. But if you're trying to create a homogeneous nationalist state, then it's very problematic. Because then, you know, how do you claim all these differences? And khas karke minorities. And minorities, de bare mein bahut zikr kita hai ki, you know, we talk about it as an Islamic state, but actually there's lots of minorities. And khas karke in 1947, there was a significant minority, right? Which is reduced significantly since. So then this is the kind of tension that I really wanted to try to cover throughout the book, because I think this is the key question that still exists today. And in fact, the book ends with this question of, well, who is a Pakistani? Because that's the essential question, right? You know, who are the people?
Who are the people? Yeah. So exactly, that's the point I was coming to, and I'm glad you raised it, because that the tension or the dilemma in Pakistan since 1947 has been how to, I mean, what is the Pakistani nation? How do you build it? So, you know, religion as a unifying factor was used between the eastern and the western wings, between the different diverse populations, and which unfortunately in 71 was kind of did not really, the test did not pass through. So you do mention, you know, you talk about Indus Valley civilization, you talk about Gandhara, you talk about other, you know, historic heritage, I mean, material and cultural heritage. But I think one of the interesting arguments is that you revisit Etazar's essence in the saga, and wherein you are sort of, you know, you're sympathetic to his argument that this particular land or this particular area had a unique, distinctive identity of its own around the Indus River, and which is still the case. And so, I mean, can you dwell a bit more on that? Because many people have argued that if Pakistan were to adopt a territorial idea of a nation state, that may be a far better, I mean, could have been a far better option than just relying on a mythical past, imagined past, or an imagined future, for that matter.
No, and I think this is the point that actually after 71, Pakistan makes much more sense, because it's a much more coherent space. This idea of the Indic and the Indus, in many ways, is a reflection of that two-nation theory, right? Which is the kind of premise upon which we have Pakistan. So if you adopt this idea that there are two nations, and then you take that further and say, well, there's the Indic and the Indus, and then after 71, it actually makes sense. But prior to that, because you have the two wings, it's a little bit more problematic, and because, you know, how do you explain this civilization and this idea of the two nation? You can form it on the basis of religion, but beyond religion, then they're very different civilizations with very different histories. So I think for me, the Indus saga was a kind of a useful kind of motive to kind of build upon this work because it makes much more sense. Now, how you take this forward, though, is still that kind of problem of embracing the kind of broader history and the long history that is the Indus.
Yeah, yeah.
And that challenge still remains.
That does. And how to reimagine Pakistan,
Yeah.
if I were to put it in that simple phrase. But I think also, Pippa, I mean, there were three major ruptures in 1947. One was, of course, this breakaway from the non-Muslim heritage. So, whether it's Gandhara or whether it's the larger idea of Indian civilization, well, I mean, even that's a construct in many ways. And then the other one was the sort of Indo-Persian past within the more medieval and colonial history.
Yeah.
And then the third rupture came in complete disengagement with whatever there was between before 47. Because the way, if you look at the writings of many Pakistani bureaucrats in 1940s, or even liberal thinkers or poets, so this idea comes in that everything that is Indian is not Pakistan, or Pakistan is everything which is not Indian. And in your study, how does that play out in contemporary Pakistan? I mean, do you think that is still the driving, overarching theme, or there is a scope for resolution?
I think that the challenge is, and this is a challenge for any new emerging nation state, that you have to carve out a distinct identity for yourself. And that's the challenge for Pakistan. Because actually you're emerging out of the same space, right? Until August 1947, you were inhabiting the same space. Of course, there was British India, there's the princely states, but more or less, mila jula jo hamara tradition hai. So out of that, then you do have to carve out something which is quite different, which is quite distinct. And that is where, you have this issue of, well, in order to make ourselves and justify ourselves, we have to other the other, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only way to then reimagine yourself and be different and justify who you are, because you can't be the same. Because if you're the same, then for the partition ki zarorat sigi, right? Farak aana chahiye hai na. So this is where I think this, you have the political project, but the next step then is the cultural reimagination, right? And culturally then you have to create separate spaces, create separate identities. And of course, language is one of the big issues.
Right.
Right? And the kind of biggest kind of, absurdity of all of this is you have someone like Jinnah who's standing in Dhaka, speaking in English and telling them ki saadi zuban Urdu honi chahiye hai. I mean, in that way, it's a difficult situation where you're imposing something from the top and saying that this is what Pakistani culture is, or Pakistani nationalism. So you then start this kind of slow process of disentangling. And I think that's the kind of the problem. But in that disentangling and separating, I think there's been a lot of loss as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of loss. But taking this forward about the disentanglement, do you think, because there's obviously one is the the state ideology or whatever it wants to promote and impose from the top, the political project. But then there's a lived reality of people, which you also allude to, the popular culture, the languages, the folk traditions, the music, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did you find in your research and while you drawing the book that how were the two going to reconcile with each other?
So this is where again the kind of the ancient comes in, right? Because if you're willing to kind of embrace the past, then this can work. But in a state which is constantly having this battle within itself, it's very difficult, because then what is the role of films? What is the role of music? And these are challenges, right? Because, and this is why I dwell on the culture, because I think actually these are very important spaces. You know, we often talk about the politics, but we don't talk about the cultural fabric.
Yeah.
And within these kind of different regimes, they've all had an impact on the culture.
Yes.
And the way they think what is Pakistani culture, and what is, what should be depicted on the screen, and what should be Pakistan's music. So, and I think that challenge is still there today. We know the kind of film industry has gone through a period of boom, decline, and, there's been now a kind of a resurgence of the kind of small independent filmmakers, which is kind of great, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And then, the kind of exchanges. I mean, we often used to see those exchanges between India and Pakistan because utthe bhi ta milya julia culture hai na. But with the kind of, the declining political relationship between the two countries, you also then see the decline and separation of the culture. And yeah.
The embrace of majoritarianism on both sides, whether in religious sense or other sense. So anyway, I mean, I'll be soon open this up for questions and answers, because I'm sure there's a big number of people and they would like to ask you questions. But I think let's talk about the future. So obviously history is, we study history to both know the present, but also think and imagine the future. And where do you think then in that sense, Pakistan's both heritage, its troubled political history, and as well as its very, very diverse, rich cultural traditions, where do they take the country and its people, forward? I mean, what do you see the trajectory?
That's very unfair.
I know it is.
because he should know that historians never predict the future.
But it's a Mila Jula session, so
Yeah, clever. I mean, so the book finishes with Imran Khan.
Yes.
Right? And the book is already out of date. So how can I possibly say where we're headed?
No, but okay, let me specify it. So do you see any indications or any signs that there are movements within Pakistani sort of elites, its cultural and political elites, or its masses, that they would want to refashion their sense of who they are or their identity? Or is it going to be the continuation of that political project that we know is in place since 1947?
I think my feeling is that struggle continues. I don't think there's any definitive answer. And the struggle is continuing in both sides. I mean, they're going in different trajectories, but the struggle is there to make yourself distinct. I mean, it's very difficult for me, coming from India and looking at what's happening there. Even there, it's the space is, in Punjab, it's a very different space. Outside Punjab, it's a different world. So, it's difficult, but I think that struggle is still there. There's still those tensions, and I don't think there's a easy path ahead. But I think if I can say something, and
yes.
I think one of the things that I have seen, and this is in many ways a kind of comparison, is I do feel that at least the kind of civil society here, because it's had years of struggling and resisting, it is actually quite vibrant here, as opposed to India, where they haven't had to have that kind of struggle because they've had a secular democracy for a long time. So that kind of civil resistance is much more, I think, present here. It shouldn't be the case, but I think it is. It exists, and I think that's at least, if there's some hope, then at least it's that.
Okay, well, that's rather optimistic.
Yeah.
Because even the notion of civil society has been, constantly challenged.
Yeah.
And these days,
Yeah.
Pakistan's so-called civil society is under attack for not being partisan in a political contest that's going on.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, what we'll do is we'll open up for questions and answers, because we should have more and more audience talking to you rather than me hogging all the time. So, anyway, let's take some questions or comments. If you have a comment, please keep it very, very brief. And questions, if you have, choose your questions, prioritize them. One question per person. Okay, there's a quota here. Okay. You can take a mic, sir. But others should know.
Okay, thank you very much. It's question mixed comment, because you being historian, you read the whole thing. And my point is, a question at the end. We never had a national anthem for 6 years. We started as a country. तो शायरान आ रहा था तो हमें याद आया कि national anthem भी होना चाहिए. Multiple factors were there. My question is, do you think that these type of interruptions or not being prepared on things, that's why we are not up to the mark, or we are not competing with other nations? Because this type of lack of preparation and massive interruptions at different level, no political system stability, which did not help us to build a culture even. Because presidency से लेके prime minister से लेके dictatorship, हम तो समझ ही नहीं आती करना क्या था हमने. So does it, those reasons, as a historian, what do you think are the factors, or there is something else? You have read about other countries. India is a different example. कि वहाँ लंबा political था तो, so point to that.
No, both. Because I think one of the things is that whilst the idea of Pakistan is well thought out, actually the detail is missing. So it's the detail which is often the problem, because you've thought about this idea, but you haven't done the minor detail. And a good example, if I can draw upon, is the UK's exit from the EU. We had this grand idea. It got a lot of currency, and then we left, and then it was like, acha, hun ki kariye, right? Yeah, so in some ways it's about that kind of planning. The detail is often what then leaves us open to these kinds of interpretations, and then that kind of political instability that you talked about.
Yeah.
Then that creates the space for
You mentioned it, Rushdie's famous remark, famous phrase, insufficiently imagined, is perhaps what you're alluding to. So anyway, other questions? Yeah.
Can I?
No, I didn't say that.
Could you please suggest any one language, because it is astonishing for me, the people who is not from subcontinent and they are in the position to promulgate, to launch some kind of juxtaposition. Culture should be this, your language should be this. This is kind of hierarchy which is not appropriate in this language, which is very moderate and.
नहीं, आप गलत समझे.
जी, ठीक है.
मेरा ये नहीं था मतलब. The issue is कि जो लोग अलीगढ़ में बैठे थे, उर्दू उनकी जुबान थी, ठीक? लेकिन वो लोग यहाँ आ गए, and वो यहाँ के लोगों को and जो ईस्ट पाकिस्तान था, उन लोगों को कह रहे थे कि सबकी जुबान उर्दू होनी चाहिए. ठीक है, हमको एक जुबान की ज़रूरत है, चाहे वो इंग्लिश, उर्दू, बंगाली, पंजाबी, जो भी है. लेकिन इसमें डिस्कशन होनी चाहिए, ठीक है? उस
नहीं, सर आपकी बात
आप इतना बोले हैं, थोड़ी सी तो सुन
नहीं नहीं, और भी लोग हैं ना जी.
आप परेशान ना हो, मैं अंग्रेजी में ही बात कर रहा हूँ.
जी.
So there are 4 provinces and we have to collaborate each other.
ठीक, yeah.
We will not listen others,
Yeah.
or we can live in one country.
Yeah.
Point
Just
taken.
it is only just for our ease. Urdu is for our ease, not any kind of sacred language.
Thank you, point
ये
taken.
गांधी कहता था हिंदी के लफ्जों में
सर
लिखी
जी,
जाती है
और लोग भी हैं. Thank you. जी.
मैं सवाल है ऐसी ਰਾਜ਼ਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ
अच्छा चलिए जी
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਲਿਆ ਹੈ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਕਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਪਿੱਛੋਂ 5000 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਲਿਆ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਅਦਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਐਂਟੀ ਆਲਸੋ ਟੂ ਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਥਿਊਰੀ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੈਕੂਲਰ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਯੂਨਿਟ ਇੱਕ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਗਰ ਇਹ ਮਿਸਟੇਕ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸੀ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਹਿਸਟੋਰਿਕਲੀ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਏ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹੋ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਕਦੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਇੱਕ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਮੁਖਤਲਿਫ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸਲੀ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਸੋ ਅਗਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਡਿਨਾਈ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਟੂ ਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਥਿਊਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਲਾ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਬਜ਼ਰਵੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਬੂਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੁਖਤਲਿਫ ਐਥਨੀਸਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੜੱਪਨ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਡਸ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਆ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਕ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਐਂਟਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਆਪਸ 'ਚ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਐਜ਼ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਊਡਲੀ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਜੈਸੇ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਵੀ ਅੰਦਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀ ਐਥਨੀਸਿਟੀਜ਼ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਨੇ ਬਟ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵਲੀ ਦੇ ਆਰ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਨੇ ਬਟ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵਲੀ ਇਟਸ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਐਂਡ ਯੋਰ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਆਫ ਕੋਰਸ UK is also an example where different ethnicities collectively are Brit. Thank you.
But I think ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ and I think this is the way
लिखिया है
ਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹੀ
तुसी
ਲਿਖਿਆ
गल कर रहे हो
ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨੈਲਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਐਥਨਿਸਿਟੀ ਹੈ ਮਾਂ ਬੋਲੀ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਰੇਸ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਆਈਡੈਂਟੀਟੀਜ਼ ਉਹ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਕੋਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਡੋਮੀਨੇਟ ਕਰੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕੋਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਥ ਸਾਥ there's no I mean that sense ਕਿ there's no tension
I think that's what the key argument in your book is. Of course, not explicitly stated, but that's what it leads to.
Thank you.
आपकी बात से मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि pluralism का जो एक आइडिया होता है ना, कहीं भी मुख्तलिफ ज़बानें मुख्तलिफ लोग जो हैं वो रह सकते हैं अमन और खुशी के साथ और अपनी अपनी ज़बान अपनी अपना मज़हब वो प्रैक्टिस कर सकते हैं लेकिन आपको एक प्लूरलिस्ट डेमोक्रेटिक फ्रेमवर्क चाहिए होता है जो कि पाकिस्तान में मसला रहा है जो कि हमारे इस नए खित्ते में मसला है सिर्फ पाकिस्तान में नहीं है और उसी की टेंशन आज हम देख रहे हैं यहाँ भी और ममालिक में
बहुत जगह होती
जी
है।
बहुत एग्जैक्टली अदर जी आपका
Pippa said that the book ends on Imran Khan. Can you please elaborate?
we knew that was coming
Yeah, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
Well, so when I was writing the book, Imran Khan had just come into power. So there was there's an air of a different regime coming in, a different expectation. Of course, knowing Pakistan, you just don't know how long this is going to last. So the challenge actually for me was, okay, how much do I mention him? Because knowing Pakistan's history, this chapter might be over sooner than I think, in which case the book becomes outdated. But I think Imran Khan is an interesting case because he enters the arena when Pakistan splits and you have just one wing left. That's when he emerges on the cricket scene, right? And through that, he's undergone a number of changes. He's become this cricket superstar. Then he started the hospital. He's gone into charity work. And then he's entered the political space. And through that history from 71 to now, actually Pakistan has also undergone those changes. And in many ways, he emboldens those changes that are here. One may not like them, but he embodies those kind of changes. So I think for me, it was important to reflect on that. Now, where it goes in the future, I wasn't able to see into that, but it ended sooner than I thought.
yeah okay
Well, it's been an abrupt end.
Right, so
Yeah.
good. That was a great response because Imran, in a way, personifies the post 71. In fact, I would say post 1977 Pakistan, and the kind of nation that was reimagined after during General Ziaul-Haq's era, after Bhutto, and the way. Again, the idea of nation or what Pakistan meant was redefined. So in a way, there was an audience created for Imran Khan type leaders. I mean, I would argue.
But I do think, actually, I mean, we hold Zia responsible for a lot of things, but I think the groundwork is laid
Much earlier.
much earlier.
Yeah, agreed, absolutely. Yes, please. Audrey. Okay, Mike. DJ.
Thank you so much. So as you were talking, it occurred to me that when we speak about Indian history, we take the entire subcontinent within our purview. And if something in pre-modern history occurred outside of the boundaries of the modern nation state of India, that's no problem, right? So that the largest cities of the Indus civilization are in Pakistan, this is no problem. It's still Indian history. That the Rig Veda was probably mainly composed in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, no problem. The rise of Taxila in the second urbanization, again, no issue there. In contrast, when we speak about Pakistani history, there tends to be an emphasis of more narrow geographical focus and only what occurred within the boundaries of the modern nation state. And so I was wondering if you could comment on this difference, and if there's a question, it's that I wonder if you think that maybe a way forward for Pakistani history is to be a bit more inclusive of at least a broader portion of the subcontinent.
But this is exactly what I talked about in the book, in that if you embrace that past and that long history, then actually that pluralistic idea of what is Pakistan, it makes sense. Because you don't see that kind of tension then between the ancient and the modern. Whereas for India, of course, it's happily embracing this past, and it has to embrace that past, even though territorially it's now not part of modern India. So I think this is the tension, that in order to kind of go forward and embrace that diversity and that pluralism, it needs to also then embrace this past much more openly, rather than just restricting itself geographically or even in terms of time. Because in terms of time, it tends to kind of downplay certain periods, and then, the kind of history starts from, well, I won't mention the names, but we know. So, from the time that Islam starts to have an impact within this space.
Thank you, Audrey. That was a great question. And, this leads me to another comment that I wanted to make, was that it's an irony that this book is not available widely in Pakistan. And in fact, one of the large publishing houses that Pippa contacted to publish this did not want to publish it. And I don't see why, because it's a book quite sympathetic to Pakistan. In fact, some would call it pro-Pakistan, quote unquote, if you were to look at some of the Indian analysts, if they were to look at that. So tell us about that. Why do you think that may happen? But we have a publisher here who has raised his finger, Mr. Sethi. Yes, please. Thank you. Are you going to publish it?
Simple answer first, yes. If he's ready to give the rights. The more important question for me is, in your study of Pakistani history, or an introduction to Pakistan's history, is there any singular thread that runs through the history of Pakistan that stands out when you look at Pakistan, when you've studied it? Is there something in it that constantly recurs and in a sense binds it or unbinds it in some way or the other? Is there any singular factor that comes to your mind that best characterizes Pakistan for you? Its cohesion or lack of it?
Yeah. No, I think but it is that challenge of, how do you make a cohesive country? How do you make it, a strong, homogenous society? It's very difficult to do that. So in that endeavor, I think you do have to embrace those differences. So that's one. But the other is, of course, simply the lack of, institutional building, because institutions need stability and time to be, to allow them to grow and to be embedded, right? But because of these constant ruptures, that simply hasn't happened. And so I think that if there's one thing, it's the lack of strong institutions. Because whatever comes and goes, you need those institutions.
So you think that it's because of the various ruptures that institutional building has not developed as it should have for a more modern nation state? Yeah.
Because it creates vacuums. But it can be seen in different South Asian studies. It's not only the case of Pakistan, it gets seen in Bangladesh as well in terms. There are obviously not clear ruptures as in Pakistan, but these fault lines are very, natural in South Asia. You cannot, it's something which is very common in South Asia, in all the states, more or less, not exactly, but you can find the same similar patterns in all South Asian states. So what is the cohesive element which can make all these, all people together? What can that point?
No, you're right. Those tensions exist, and I think those tensions exist in India. They exist in Bangladesh. It's a question of how you deal with that, right? So here, I suppose the point I'm making is that if you have stronger institutions, at least there's that kind of inbuilt robustness which can deal with those challenges. But if those are weak, then what you're doing is you're creating spaces for other players to come in. And I suppose it's those other players which have taken a much greater role, which hasn't happened so much in the case of India. I think in the case of India now, it's much more of a cultural reimagination that's going on. It's a cultural project as well as a religious project that's going on. And I don't know, what road that's going to sort of ultimately go, they're going to go in, because it seems even with India, they're going to have elections this year, Modi is going to come back into power. So that's 15 years of BJP rule in India. But what is also happening there, which I can see, is that they are beginning to put people who are sympathetic to that project in the institutions. And I think that's the key, that if there isn't openness and transparency, then how do you embrace everyone into that project? Because it needs to be an open society, it needs to represent everyone.
Absolutely.
In other words, absence of system, because institutions, if we compare with other Muslim states or Arab states, there's totally absence of institutions in terms of. According to you, is this the absence of system? It's also access. It's access and being part of that system.
I would like to weigh in, although not my place, but I think I would like to elaborate what Pippa said, is that, you have a prime minister in this country who wakes up, goes to office, and in the evening he or she could be in jail. We have seen how Benazir Bhutto's twice she was dismissed. They used to come and cut the telephone wires. They cut the telephone wires of Sikandar Mirza when General Ayub had to oust him. These are all documented in history. So if there's one theme, in my opinion, and of course, Pippa, it's a very populist take, not an academic, insightful take, is that a constant disrespect for the will of people, which continues to date. Today, what is the contest in Pakistan? The contest is, this whole turmoil is that there's a large group of aware middle-class Pakistanis who think that, the person they repose their faith in has been incarcerated and is being forcibly kicked out, right or wrong. And it has been happening throughout. And I think that's just one symptom. I'm not saying, but if you take it to the institutional level, then it's the parliament, it's the process of elections, it's a process of, putting in people's will into governance.
But it's also about the kind of respecting the rule of law and justice, social justice, right? These are all important factors wherever you are. And if people feel aggrieved and they don't have that justice, then that creates, a parallel system where they try to seek.
The state and one institution have become synonymous.
Yeah, so you could use the mic if you want.
Yeah, just.
I would request you not to.
Yeah, but so let it be.
It's being recorded as well. So, यहाँ पे था आपका सवाल था? ताजी, please. नहीं इनका, जी. Mic दीजिए जरा, please.
Thank you. I have a simple question uh, about myself. I, being Punjabi, feel that I don't like my language, whereas the people across the board, they are in love with Punjabi. What you have the opinion about this detest that why Punjabis living in this part of the world don't like their language, whereas just crossing the border, they seem to be in love with the language. Thank you.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰੀਏ ਗੱਲ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਦੋਸਤ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕੰਮ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਇੱਥੇ ਐਸੀ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਬਟ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ embrace ਕੀਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ but that is also part of the project ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੂਬਾ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਆਈ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਫਾਦਰ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੀ ਉਰਦੂ ਦੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਨੋਟਸ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਉਹ ਉਰਦੂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਖ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਸੋ ਐਸੀ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਕਿ ਹਿਸਟੋਰੀਕਲੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜਸ ਇੰਬਰੇਸ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਬਟ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੂਬਾ ਬਣਿਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਜੁੜੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਬਟ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸਿਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਆ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਦੀਆਂ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸਿਸ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਬਰੇਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕੰਟਰਡਿਕਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਐਂਟੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਆ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਦ ਟੂ ਕੈਨ ਕੋਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟ ਐਂਡ ਇਟ ਗੋਜ਼ ਬੈਕ ਟੂ ਦੈਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਰਦੂ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਬਾਨਾਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਆ ਬਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਛੋੜ ਦੋਗੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜੁੜੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਹੈਗੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਚਲ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ
ਚਲੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਇਹੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ
ਸੋ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਿਟੇ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਪੜੇਗਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਬੋਲੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਜੁੜਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ
ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ one nation one religion one language जो है ना फ्रेमवर्क वो आपके जो सवाल था उसका वजह ये है और मैं भी उर्दू में जवाब दे रहा हूँ आपको जी जी तम
Punjab had to disown or look down upon its mother tongue.
You should answer that as a leading star of Punjabi intelligentsia. So
I mean, I think ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਕਿਉਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਇੱਥੇ well, I mean, ਮੇਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫਰੇਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੋਗੇ ਐਂਡ ਯੂ ਬਿਕਮ ਪਾਰਟ ਆਫ ਦੈਟ ਰੂਲਿੰਗ ਕਲਾਸ then ਉੱਥੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਅਹਿਮੀਅਤ ਰਹੇਗੀ ਕਿਉਂ because there's a shift that's taken place because Punjabis are part of that ruling class so ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਰਦੂ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀ national ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਆ ਫਿਰ then you have to embrace that first yourself before you can tell everyone else to embrace it and ਦੂਸਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ I think that the point is ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲ ਲੈਂਗੇ ਪਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਉਹ ਸਵਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਜੇ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਊਬਰ ਲੈ ਲਿਆ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਰਦੂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇਗਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਡਾਇਲੈਕਟ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਡਾਇਲੈਕਟ ਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ it's it's a different thing it's not the dialect ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਲੋਕ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਾਲਪੁਰ ਚਲ ਜਾਓ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹੀ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ ਜੋ ਮੈਂ ਬੋਲਦੀ ਆ So Lahore the gal ho rahe, but we're talking about certain, yeah.
Uneducated, you should be ashamed.
It is when you come to light, or when light comes to you, then you make the choice of whether you want to embrace your language or not. As far as culture is concerned, with the language, ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ ਮਦਾਰੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਮੋਟਰ ਲੱਗ ਗਈ ਹੈ. So that has to, the language has to sort of come forward and think ਕਿ ਅੱਛਾ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਚੱਕੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਉਪਲੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ. If you say that's culture, no, that would be happening anywhere in a rural setting, right? So now that you have to realize, you have to come up with a new vocabulary. You have to know that if you want to embrace your language, then you have to speak it no matter what you're wearing and no matter where you are sitting.
We have a question. Thank you for the intervention. That's very correct. Okay.
Because I thought this was the language that made me
Wonderful.
gave me more vocabulary to express myself.
Hats off
Hello.
to you. And
Sir,
so
here.
there was a comment after that for this one.
Yeah, here.
हिस्ट्री हम बच्चों को पढ़ा रहे हैं जो कि फॉल्स है, जी कंस्ट्रक्टेड है. जब तक हम उसको नहीं निकालेंगे और एक रियल हिस्ट्री बच्चों को नहीं बताएंगे पार्टीशन की भी इस, क्योंकि देखिए हमारे यहाँ तो बच्चों को ये पढ़ाया जा रहा है कि 712 में जो है ना ये
जी पाकिस्तान बन गया था. That's what I wanted to tell Dr. Audrey, who asked a question, and Pippa, that they're extremely ill-informed because Pakistan was created in 712 when Muhammad bin Qasim set his foot on the on soil. So, but anyway, जी.
तो इस फॉल्सहुड के साथ जब आप लोगों को बड़ा कर रहे हैं तो वो तो एक वैक्यूम में है ना, तो उस वैक्यूम में फिर वो कैसे कोई थिंकिंग
Yeah, here. Yeah. Sir, my name is Noreen Fatma. I'm PhD scholar from Punjabi University. मेरा question पेपर से ये है कि उनके अगर there must be a reimagination in culture, क्योंकि अगर कुछ फिर partition हुंदी ना, do you it means कि do you think that there is a pure relation culture with religion?
Okay. So, culture, religion, and falsehood. So these are the last two questions. Yes.
And big topics. Big.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Cough sweets. I think the thing is that religion and culture are two different things. Yeah. Often they're intermixed together, and one kind of assumes that what is culture is also religion. But I think we can separate the two. ਕੁਛ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਲਚਰਲੀ ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਮੇਬੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਲੋਹੜੀ ਦਾ ਦਿਨ ਹੈ ਰਾਈਟ
ਪਤਾ ਹੈ
ਸੋ ਲੋਹੜੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮਨਾਈ ਗਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਸੋ ਲੋਹੜੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਇਟਸ ਅ ਕਲਚਰਲ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਬਟ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਮਜ਼ਹਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜ ਦੋਗੇ ਫਿਰ ਕੀ ਬਣੇਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਤਾਂ then you lose these kind of traditions right ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਜ਼ਮਾਨੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਸੰਤ ਵੀ ਮਨਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਬਸੰਤ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਦਰ ਕਰਤਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਬਸੰਤ ਵੀ ਖਤਮ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੋ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਮਜ਼ਹਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਦਿਓ then it leads to a change and an erosion gradually falsehoods well falsehoods ਤਾਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਨਾ I mean ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਮੁਲਕ ਅਗਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲਿਸਟ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਲਿਖਣੀ ਆ and I say this about the UK as well ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਇੱਕ perspective ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਰਿਕੂਲਮ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਤਾਲੀਮ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ and these are questions I think that all nations wrestle with to a greater or lesser extent biases ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ but ਉਹ biases ਥੋੜੇ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ but ਸਾਡਾ purpose ਜਿਹੜਾ as a historian is ਕਿ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ sources ਆ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ arguments ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ critically question ਕਰੋ analyze ਕਰੋ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛੋ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ then we lose that ability to question. And I think that's the role of the historian, to constantly probe and ask. Yeah.
Okay, great. So there's one last comment. We only have 2 minutes, unfortunately. So
I just have a comment. It's not a question, and it's about the Punjabi and Urdu, deciding what we want. So I run a small workplace where I have people who work for me. And, when I tell, they speak Urdu and they speak Punjabi, and there's never any problem कि ये बोलना या ये नहीं बोलना. Whenever I tell someone, ऐसो बताई तू काम करना में, या it's not done. When I tell him, ये आपने सुबह तक करना है, it is done. So I have made Urdu the official language in my workplace because Punjabi, no one takes me seriously.
because it's a state language.
Yeah.
And some hint of violence. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have come to the end of this session. Please give Pippa a big hand.